So welcome children once again, and today the topic we are going to study is constructor. Now children, in my last video we discussed about the library functions, where I discussed about mathematical functions and character functions and user defined function. Now children, we'll move on to user defined functions, but before we move on to the user defined function, we must know about constructors. So children, this is the topic constructor which I am going to teach today. And children will say what a constructor is. Every class which you create or which you have created till date. So every program which you write as a class has got its own constructor. So children, when we talk about constructor, we say that constructor is a member of a class. So that means it is created within a class. And children, the constructor is used, or it is created within a class to create objects of a class or to initialize objects of a class with legal initial values. So when we create objects of a class with the keyword new, in that particular statement we write the constructor also, and the work of the constructor is to initialize the objects of a class with legal initial values. Now children, you might be thinking that till date you have not written any constructor. So if you are not writing a constructor, the computer by default is writing a constructor, is providing a constructor to you, which is called as a default constructor, and it is storing the default values to all the values of the data of the object which you are creating. So children, basically a constructor, we say, is the member of the class. It is defined within a class, and the purpose of constructor is that it is used to initialize objects of the class which are created with legal initial values. So you cannot create an object without any value. Now in my initial videos children, I told you that a class is just a logical placeholder, or it is just a blueprint. An object is an actual object which you are created. So we talked about that a class is just like a blueprint. It is just like a blueprint of a house. So when you create a house, you just create, when you create the blueprint of the house, you don't need any material, or you don't need any data item. But when you create a house from that blueprint, you need data item like brick, cement, etc. So it is this work which is being provided by the constructor. And children, when we talk about constructor, there are some features of constructor. The first feature of a constructor is that a constructor has the same name as its class. If you see children, I have written an example of a constructors over here, not one constructor. I have written many constructors. So children, here I have written a class ABC, and in this class children, I have declared my three variables as int x, int double y, and string z. So these are three variables. These three variables which I have declared over here are called as instance variables. They are called as instance variable. Now children, instance is a word given to object, so we can say that these are object variables. Now children, here in the class I have declared these variables for the first time in my programming. So you can even declare some variables here within a class with the keyword static. Now the variables declared with the keyword static int x, so those variables are called as the class variable or the global variable. But these variables which I have created without the keyword static, they are called as the instance variable, or they are called as the object variable. Children, at present these variables do not exist. When we create objects of this class, then only these variables comes as the instance of those objects. Say for example, for this object I create an object A. Say if I create an object capital A. So when this object A will be created, it is going to have three variables which are the instance variables within this object, and these instance variables then will be termed as, you have three variables, we have variable x, so for this object it will be called as a dot x, for this instance it will be called as a dot y and a dot z. So children, if I create the object A, if I create object A, say object A of this class, then an object of this type gets created. But children, you cannot create an object without a value. So there must be some value within this instance of the object. So these values are provided by the constructor. So children, here I have written, you can see that here I have written many constructors. This is my first constructor. Then here I have written my second constructor. Then again I have written my third constructor. So children, you can see that I have written three constructors over here, and I can write any number of constructors within a class. So children, when I execute this program, say if I execute this program on Blue Java platform, this will get executed only on Blue Java platform because I have not written a main over here, but I can execute my object. Say if I am executing this program, and when I execute this program, so it is going to ask me to create an object. As we create object, so before it creates an object, it will ask me that which constructor you require. You require the first constructor or the second constructor or the third constructor. You can use either of them, any one of them. And say if you use this constructor and you want to create an object of this class, then children, for this, the first value, that is int a, it is asking you to enter, and rest of the two values 20.25 to y and stems to z is being given by the program itself. So we have written it in the program, so this value comes within the program. And children, since if I enter a value say 5 to a and I create my object with this constructor, then my value will become say 5. Since I have entered my value in a as 5, this value gets stored in x, which is the instance variable of a. Y value y or a dot y will store this value 20.25, and a dot z is going to store this value stems. So I create this object with this. Now children, say for the next time I create another object of the same class as b. So another object will come, and it is also going to have these three variables, but here its name will be b dot x, b dot y and b dot z. So children, these are the three instances of this object. And say children, now this time I create my object with this constructor. So I use this constructor to create. Here children, the user is giving any two values by himself, but the third value is being given by the program. Say if he enters the value now, say 7 over here, so this value gets stored over here because from 8 gets transferred to x. And say if I enter 5.5 to b, then 5.5 gets stored to y, which is the object of b. So 5.5 gets stored over here. But to z, this value is already given in the program. So in z, you will get this value, which is already there. So children, you can see that I have created two objects here, a and b, of the same class. And these two objects, since they are created from the same class, they have their similar you can say setup, or you can say they will have the same type of data, but their values are different. These values are different because of the different constructors I have used. Say for the third object, say if I want to create the third object over here, then my third object can be created, and any number of objects you can create, but here it will be c dot x, c dot y and c dot z. And say for creating this object, I use this constructor, the third one. Here children, all the three values are asked by the user. The user is going to enter any three values, int a, double b or string c. And say whatever values he stored, those values get transferred to x, y and z, and those values will be feeded here in this. So you can see children, from the same class you get three different objects, but they have different values stored in it, and these values are provided by the constructor. So we say that a constructor is a member of a class, and a constructor is used to initialize objects of the class with legal initial values at the time of their creation. I hope children this is clear. Now children, we come to the features of constructor. Now children, the first feature is that when you write a class ABC, your constructor should also have the same name ABC. So first feature is the constructor of a class must have the same name, as I have written ABC in all these constructors. So a constructor has the same name as its class. So you cannot have different name to a constructor. So a constructor has the same name as its class. That is first feature. Then children, when you write any other function, you write its data type. This is the data type or the return type. So this function is returning a value void, which is not returning any value actually. So children, a constructor do not returns any value, don't have any return type. So we just write public ABC. So a constructor do not have any return type. Is it clear? So first feature is a constructor has the same name as its class. The second feature of a constructor is that a constructor do not have any return type because it is not performing any task. It is just initializing value to the objects at the time of creation of objects. Now children, the next is that a function may be having any access level. It can be public, private, protected, but usually you take the access level or you define the access specifier of the constructor as public, as I have declared it as public in all the three cases. It is declared as public so that this constructor may be used by the member function as well as by the non-member function. That means if other classes are inheriting this features of this class, then they can also use this constructor. That is why it is declared as constructor as of type public. And the next thing is, children, that if we do not provide a constructor, the compiler automatically provides a default constructor. And children, a default constructor is without any argument. This int a double b, these int a double b double c, these are arguments or these are parameters. So the default constructor which is provided is not containing any values. So children, even you can also create your own default value, default constructor. I'll show you the example of a default constructor. So a default constructor is automatically provided by the compiler and it contains the default values. So the default values are, if you have a data type of type byte, its default value is 0. If you have a data type of short, its default value again is 0. For int it is 0. For long it is 0L or 0 small l. These are the default values. Then children, I'll be writing here only. Then for float data type it is 0.0f or capital F. Then for double it is 0.0f or small f or capital F. Then for character it is null, null, null. For string also it is null. And for Boolean data type it is false. Now children, these default values you must know because it is asked in the paper what is the default value of data type Boolean, or what is the default data type, what is the default value of data type long. So these values are asked in the paper, so you must remember. These are those values which are provided when we don't provide our own constructor, then the compiler provides the constructor. And children, as soon as we provide our own constructor, the default constructor is not provided by the compiler. In order to have the default constructor also, you will have to write it. Now children, we'll come to constructor. I hope it's clear. Constructor, I told you that it is a member of a class, and a constructor is used to initialize objects of the class with legal initial values, and a constructor has the same name as its class. A constructor do not have any return type. A constructor is only used to initialize the objects of the class and it is not containing any other statement. So a constructor is defined as under the public section of the modifier or under the access specifier, and it is defined as public because it may be used by member functions as well as by non-member function. If it is defined as public or private, then it will not be used by the other functions or by the non-member function. So children, this is regarding the constructor. Now we come to the types of constructor. The types of constructor is that children, you have two types of constructors. One is the parameterized constructor. All these three constructors are the parameterized constructor. And children, you can even have a non-parameterized constructor, as I want to write over here, a non-parameterized constructor. Say a constructor without any parameter value. That is called as a non-parameterized constructor. But for this children, we will have to provide values to x. I am providing it 0. Value to y as 0.0d and value to z as null. So children, this is the default constructor. If I don't write any constructor, then this default constructor would have been there. But if I have written my own constructors, then even I want a default constructor, then I have to write this default constructor also. So children, now we have two types of constructors. First is the parameterized constructor. This is the parameterized constructor, and this is the non-parameterized constructor. And when we talk about parameterized constructors are those constructors which has parameters, and the user is providing a single or more than one values or to all the values to the instance variables of that object being created. And the non-parameterized constructor is also called as a default constructor, where the value to the object is provided through the program or by the default values. So in order to have a default constructor also along with the parameterized constructor, the user has to write it. And if the user does not write any of these constructors, then this default constructor automatically gets added in our class, and it adds values to the object, these default values. These are all the default values which I have written over here. Now children, please note down these values. They are very important. And now children, one more thing which we must know about constructor is there is one term called constructor overloading. Constructor overloading. This is that state when a class is having more than one constructor, we call it as constructor overloading. Questions on constructor overloading has come. So children, in this particular class ABC, I have 1, 2 and 3 constructors now. So this is an example of constructor overloading. So if a class has more than one constructor, it is called as constructor overloading. I will give you a few examples of constructor overloading which has been asked in the paper also. Now children, one more thing which is always asked is, now what is the difference between a constructor and a function? So this is my function and this is my constructor. So by looking at these two things, this is a constructor and this is my function, I can make out a difference. So differences are asked. What is the difference between a constructor and a function? So we say that first thing is that the constructor has the same name as its class, whereas the function, here the name of the function is output, where the function has a different name than its class. Is it clear? First difference is constructor has the same name as its class and function has a different name. First difference. The second difference is that a constructor do not have any return type. A constructor do not have any return type, whereas a function has a return type which is void over. So all the functions must have a return type. If the function is returning some value, say if it is returning a value double, then in place of void it should have been double. If it is returning a character value, it should be character. If it is returning a boolean value, it should have been boolean. So a constructor do not returns any value, but a function returns a value. The third difference is that a constructor contains only statements to initialize objects of the class. It is only used to initialize objects. Whereas a function contains statements to create objects, work on objects and other executable statements. So children, I hope regarding this construction all the things are clear to you, and this constructor I am going to use in my user defined functions. So the next topic which we'll be studying about is the user defined function. We'll just have a quick review of this topic. Constructors. All the classes which you write has constructor in it. If you don't write, the computer provides the default constructor. A constructor is a member of a class. That means it is within a class. And a constructor is used to initialize objects of the class with initial values at the time of their creation. So every time you use the word new in creation of object, you write the constructor also. And children, the next thing is that a constructor has the same name as its class. It do not have any return type and it is used to initialize objects of the class only. And the next thing, it is defined under the public section of the access specifier so that it may be used by the member functions as well as by the non-member functions. Now the next thing is constructors are of two types: parameterized constructors, those constructors which have values to it, which have parameters, and the user provides his own value to either one or to all the instances of the object. And non-parameterized constructor do not have any parameters and here the values are provided within the program. The default constructor is also called as the non-parameterized constructor is also called as the default constructor, since it provides the default initial values to the objects being created, and the default values of different primitive data types are listed over here. Byte, you have 0, short 0, int 0, long 0l, float 0.0f, double 0.0, double 0.0d, sorry, d, then character null, string null, and boolean value is false. So these are the default values which are created, and every time I create, now children, since I create an object A and I come to this function and I print this this function, or I execute this function which is containing the print statement, since I am printing through object A, so that means these values to x, y, and z gets printed. If I make object B and I take my control, my mouse pointer over there, I click my my right mouse button and I print output, I execute this function, I will get these values. So every time I create these objects, I work on these objects through this function, you get different values being displayed, because we have 3 different objects in this particular example being created. So children, you can say that objects of the same classes are created, or multiple objects from the same classes are created, but they have different internal values. So this is the importance of constructor over here. I hope this topic is clear. And one more thing is that constructor overloading. Constructor overloading is that thing where you have more than one constructor within a class. It is called as constructor overloading. So children, thank you, and we'll be discussing about constructors and user defined functions also. Thank you very much.